Hi friends, you're watching Faint Signals from Viga. So I've been watching how the various leaders of different countries have been responding to this Christchurch Muslim massacre, this mosque massacre that happened yesterday. And it's amazing how hypocritical, but it's not amazing, but it's truly breathtaking to see the hypocrisy of some of these leaders. Like, for example, our Prime Minister here in Australia, Scott Morrison. He looked like he was about to burst into tears when he was talking about how these right-wing extremists, I love the way he uses the word right-wing when his government is as right-wing as they come, and he is extremist in his views. I talked yesterday about how he was actually trying to develop an anti-Muslim strategy back in 2011 when he was the opposition immigration person in the government, the opposition. And you know, he was trying, and even his friends, even his colleagues weren't on board with that. He wanted to do that unilaterally. He's a major Islamophobe. He's homophobic, he's transphobic. He's as racist as all get up, and then he's, you know, out in front of the cameras because he knows this is going to be shown around the world, and also it's almost election time, a federal election coming up. So he's sort of bending over backwards to look like he's some sort of reasonable, caring Prime Minister when he doesn't give a toss about Australian citizens. That's very clear. He has contempt for poor people, he has contempt for those who are unemployed, he has contempt for the disabled, he makes fun of trans people, he has contempt for LGBTIQ people in general. He is appalling when it comes to asylum seekers. He's Islamophobic as they come, and here he is standing in front of the cameras looking as if he's about to burst into tears as he condemns this massacre in Christchurch. And then I see Bibi Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, who is a genocidal Islamophobe. I mean, he's actually committing a genocide of Palestinians every single day, and that's been going on in Israel now since the late 40s. It's been just an ongoing genocide, ethnic cleansing genocide. I would call it a genocide, really, because he starves Palestinians in Gaza. They just bomb Gaza, and Gazans can't leave that area. There's a blockade of things coming into Gaza. They've had a sea blockade there. They attack. It's a sort of it's like in that awful Species of saying, shooting fish in a barrel. That's what he does to people, the refugees in Gaza, the Palestinians. And you know, in the West Bank, it's no better. It's just sort of a appalling situation for Palestinians in Israel. It's an apartheid state, literally, because even just recently he basically said that the state of Israel is a Jewish state, and basically other people don't matter. I'll show you a meme. I'll show you a quote from him. It's just amazing how they think people are stupid enough to believe that. There are a lot of people who would believe that. There are a lot of people who probably think Scott Morrison is, you know, what a great response he had to that massacre. And it would have been a great response had he actually, his actions in the past showed that he was that kind of leader, but he's not. Jacinda Ardern, the Prime Minister of New Zealand, when she speaks, I feel like it's from the heart because her actions in the past demonstrate that. She says that they are us. I think she means it. I think so anyway. So, you know, but there was a bunch of people, and then there was these alt-right pundits, you know, extremist, alt-right pundits basically, like Ben Shapiro, you know, who's often dumping on Muslims. Suddenly he cares, you know, people like that. And as I said in my last video, there's been this culture of Islamophobia globally, either via social media, either by commenters who go on and leave Islamophobic comments, and apparently it's not against Facebook community standards. There's, you know, there's many people who now grift. They're grifters. They've decided that spewing hate actually is a profitable business, and so they get on YouTube and they have hundreds of thousands of subscribers because apparently it's quite fun to dump on minority groups, and they actually make a fair bit of money from it. I've noticed that even somebody who was supposedly a left-wing talking head on YouTube suddenly started moving to the right, and I think it's because he realized there's more money in that. I mean, you know, it's sort of really sickening. And then the Labor Party puts out the Australian Labor Party puts out a statement condemning this massacre. They've been, as I said, responsible for these appalling asylum seeker policies, sticking women and children and men in these detention centres off in Nauru and Manus Island and now Christmas Island. And they have no interest in reversing those awful policies, and people have been self-harming. They've been abused there. Children have been abused. Children are self-harming. Children are looking like zombies because they can't stand it anymore, being in these sort of detention centres. And there's no end to it. They don't know when they'll be let out. That's a sort of a psychological torture. And so they've been physically and psychologically, you know, the Labor Party has been complicit in the psychological and physical torture of those people in those asylum seekers who are fleeing our Western imperialist wars in their countries, in Muslim majority countries. And that's why I have, and of course nobody acknowledges that. The Labor Party, I wouldn't expect anything better from the government, the coalition, because they're just a right-wing extremist party and they do whatever the US wants them to. But so does the Labor Party. The Labor Party is fine, the Australian Labor Party is fine stating that they recognise Juan Guaido, who's a self-proclaimed president of Venezuela, who was not elected and who's trying to who has been inviting a military invasion of Venezuela by the US for oil, and so that they can privatise everything. And that's who the Australian Labor Party is backing. You know, the US government, the US is the rogue state. The US, in fact, is just recently, Trump has been threatening, and this is not just Trump, this is just how they are in general, is threatening the personnel of the International Crimes Court, that you know, threatening them not to prosecute the US for crimes, war crimes, threatening them. And John Bolton, you know, he's been also threatening the International Crimes Court. This is a rogue state, the US, and this is who the Australian Labor Party defers to and submits to. And when they say, I want you to recognise Juan Guaido, and I want you to promote the idea that Venezuela needs to be, you know, sort of taken over. That, you know, and they say how high, you know, it's sort of like that. They're just complete lackeys to US empire, and so is the coalition. And the Green Party never talks about anti-war. Very, very rarely do they ever mention anything about our foreign policy. They have problems with asylum seekers being left to rot in these detention centres. But where do they think these asylum seekers come from? They don't come out of a vacuum. They're not leaving their countries because their countries are incompetent and they don't know how to look after themselves. They're leaving their countries, fleeing their countries, because we have been bombing the bejesus out of their countries. Obama was bombing the Middle East at 3 bombs every hour of every day for 8 years. And Trump has increased that. Obama increased the wars from 2 wars to 7. You know, we've been, the Western imperialism, the US, the UK, Canada, Australia, etc., have been destroying the Middle East. So there is a Christchurch, New Zealand massacre every day in the Middle East, every day in Iraq, Afghanistan, and so forth. And this is something that isn't really recognized. And there's this complete culture of global Islamophobia that is acceptable. And it's often, you know, and anti-Semitism, that's not acceptable, but Islamophobia is completely acceptable. And by the way, Arabs are Semites too. So, you know, it's just sort of, you know, I mean, I didn't expect anything else with anything other than what has happened with people condemning these attacks, and yet they are responsible in part, complicit in part, for the Islamophobia in the world and to violence against Muslims. It's really all I wanted to say was that, you know, that every single day in the Middle East, in Muslim majority countries, there is a Christchurch, New Zealand massacre of Muslims and other people who are not Muslims in those countries. That is the elephant in the room. Because when you are able to, when your government and the soldiers, the military, when it's seen as quite acceptable to be over there causing havoc, causing managed chaos, taking the resources of those countries, it sends a message to people that these people are lesser and we can do whatever the hell we want in their country. The same goes for our attitude towards Venezuela. Mostly brown people in Venezuela, and the lighter skinned people are often quite wealthy, and the brown skinned people want to continue on with the Bolivarian revolution. They want to continue on with a socialist setting, and all we can do, the Western governments, the US is the leader, has been to impose crippling economic sanctions and just increase those sanctions and increase to make the economy scream, which is what they're trying to do, and then attack their infrastructure, and then try and invade, try and create unrest by funding the opposition, funding the violent opposition, the guerimbas in Venezuela, and check out the Empire Files to find out more about that. And, you know, then claim that socialism fails. Then claim that socialism is failing when they're doing everything they can, the US, to mess with that country. And we're complicit in that. The Australian Labor Party is actually going along with that. And it's all for oil. They've even admitted it. John Bolton admitted it. So, you know, it's appalling, right? So anyway, with all that going on, is there any wonder that there's this general, it seems like it's completely permissible to be Islamophobic? And yet everybody goes on about anti-Semitism. That's the big no-no. But Islamophobia, that's okay. And now 49 people are dead because of it. 49 people. And many people injured. And a community completely traumatized. As if they don't already feel excluded in some ways from society and vilified. And then they get this. And then, you know, and then they have to watch the hypocrisy. We don't think that they're aware that countries that they come from are being interfered with by the US and being meddled with and bombed, and they're aware of that. Imagine what that must be like. And you can't really say anything because you're trying to fit into a society where it's like you have to shut up and be quiet and just, you know, because who knows, you're like somebody like Trump might throw you out, or Scott Morrison might throw you out. You know, it's like you've got to be quiet and suck it up if you're Muslim in this country. You know, because there is such an anti-Muslim climate, an Islamophobic climate. There are a lot of Australians that aren't like that. There's a lot of Australians. It's probably a small minority, but they've got a very loud voice, and the government is definitely Islamophobic. So anyway, that's all I wanted to say, just to be aware that we're doing this style of massacre every single day, our Western governments, in Muslim majority countries. So it's like, this is not unusual, it just happens to be on our soil, not on theirs. So please leave comments if you like, please subscribe and hit the notifications bell, otherwise you don't receive updates. Click the like button if you like the content, and please share if you think it's worth it. And thanks so much for watching. My name's Trish Roberts. You're watching Faint Signals from Vega. Till next time, peace.
Yesterday in the evening when I first got these news, I was just like sharing it on Facebook and Twitter, but I didn't really give it much more attention. until I realized today in the morning that the whole media was full of it, which is absolutely right. But I realized the reason why I didn't pay more attention to it was because it did not really surprise me. I think we should not at all look at this incident as an isolated New Zealand incident, because we know that today in our Western democracies, Islamophobia has become the mainstream form of racism that is shared by large parts of our societies. Many political leaders, not only on the fringe far right, but in the center of power, be it leftist nominally, Christian democratic nominally, or whatever, many of them share a dehumanized discourse on Islam and Muslims that can lead to these kinds of terrorist attacks. The dehumanization that we have been witnessing the last 15 to 20 years, at least in the political discourse in most of the Western countries, can lead to these kinds of terrorist attacks. So it's just one step from the word to the deed. If you continuously dehumanize people, treat them in a different way, implement legislation that discriminates against them, so what do you think that will happen? Some of them will say Islam hates us, like we have a president of the strongest country in this world at this point of time that would argue a whole religion hates us, the rest of the people, white people. So if something like that is possible in a democracy, then much more is possible than this, I would guess.